everyone. Hello. I'm Bahargul, and on behalf of Hire Team, it is my pleasure to welcome you back to this live session. And it has been a busy day for some of you. And if this is your first time joining the EFMD Global Career Fairs, a warm welcome. It is fantastic to see so many people of you are here today. We are so excited to bring you this exclusive workshop with AlphaSight. And our speaker is Alessandra Golden, Vice President of Talent Acquisition at AlphaSight, is a global leader in knowledge on demand. In this session, we will explore how experts' insights fuels the consulting decision-making process and how firms like AlphaSight play a crucial role in empowering clients through access to knowledge. So for audience, make sure to share your thoughts and any questions that you may have, please use the chat. This session is supposed to be very interactive, so please make sure to use the chat to interact with us. And now, without any delay, I will hand over to Alessandra. Alessandra, over to you.
Lovely. Bahar, thank you so much for the introduction and great to be here. It's my first time doing a format like this, so excited to experience it with all of you. I guess exactly as she mentioned, I'll kind of dive right in, but first introducing myself. So my name is Alessandra. You can probably tell I'm originally from the US. I went to university there. I studied cognitive science and literature, so fairly interdisciplinary, but I knew when I graduated that I wanted to be involved in business. Fundamentally was looking for something that was fast-paced, client-facing, gave me project management skills. And as I imagine several of you as well, was thinking about going into consulting. But in some of those interview processes, et cetera, I kind of realized what I liked was the idea of working with clients, driving impact, getting exposure to different industries, but fundamentally being able to create results. And the way that, consultants worked with clients was less interesting to me than the way AlphaSights was. And so ultimately kind of went into AlphaSights in search of exactly that kind of a client-facing results oriented environment, and have now been here for 7 years. I did our client service track, which is exactly what we hire for, and now I'm the vice president that oversees our talent acquisition. So fundamentally what keeps me in this role is essentially trying to train early career talent just like you. So my goal today is to kind of give you an insight into what is this industry. I'd never heard of it before either. And how do we work with actually the consulting industry themselves to help them do what they do. So a little bit about what we do. So fundamentally what AlphaSights is it's a knowledge partner. So we're in an industry that we call knowledge on demand. And the idea is that we connect our clients, who are primarily consultants, corporations, private equity, capital markets, so hedge funds, things like that, with industry experts who have knowledge that they need. So let's say we're a consulting firm, which is an example I'll walk through in this presentation, consulting firm that's helping a private equity company decide whether or not they want to invest into a particular industry. What we'll do is we'll look for the right experts, the right people who have that knowledge that would help them make that business decision, and we put them in touch. So essentially, our associates are the ones who are out there finding experts who are often C-level executives, people who are on the ground and actually, doing this work, and we connect them with our clients to facilitate that knowledge exchange. And we do that at a fairly high degree of speed and quality, and fundamentally really owning that client relationship is how we've grown over the years. So I'll focus today primarily on our consulting clients and how we specifically support consulting clients. But of course, if you have any questions about any of our other divisions, I'm happy to chat through that as well. So in terms of what we'll chat about today is we'll go through kind of insight into how the consulting due diligence process works and how the knowledge economy powers competitive decision-making. So the knowledge economy is this knowledge on demand industry that I mentioned that we're in. So what we'll cover, and again, some of this will be new to you, but some of this will also not be new to you, just hopefully presented in a different lens. So how do consulting firms make decisions and fundamentally empower their clientele? What is the value of industry experts as a primary research method to help drive that decision-making? So fundamentally helping our clients make an impact with their clients. What is the role of firms like AlphaSights in driving that? And then examples of how experts really contribute to the consultant workflow to essentially inform their work. So a bit of background on the consulting space. Consulting firms primarily serve two main client groups. So the first one is private equity firms. So a PE firm is fundamentally a firm that invests in a private business and essentially decides if they kind of want to help them with the transformation or invest in them and grow them, and then essentially sell them over and over again. So a PE firm will hire a consultant to essentially assess the value of an investment and decide if it's a good investment to make. There's a lot of opportunities for that, so it's kind of deciding which is the best route. And then a diligence, so what we call a due diligence, it runs 2 to 4 weeks, and fundamentally what they're doing in that process is kind of trying to decide if it's a good idea. So that's one option. Sorry. The other option is a corporation. So fundamentally, we call that a corporate strategy project. So essentially, they'll hire a consulting firm to strategically advise on a specific aspect of the business. So think of that as like a sales and marketing or pricing transformation, a post-merger integration, cost management, organizational structure, manufacturing, corporate due diligence, all these aspects that essentially are unique to how a company runs. And a consulting firm will kind of come in and help a big organization that is only really experienced in that one thing decide what the right way to go about that is. So that's what a consulting firm does. And specifically, they specialize in 3 key areas. So one is this point about strategy. So think specifically in the context of kind of private equity firms. They'll provide investors with insights about the quality of the business, outlook, potential opportunities to improve an acquisition after an investment is made. So they're conducting qualitative and quantitative research to help clients find answers to business challenges, but they themselves are not involved in the implementation. So think, for example, like your MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. These are the types of companies that are kind of advising on the strategic direction of a particular company, but they themselves don't actually help execute it. There's also implementation. So this is almost another frame of consulting where, maybe they're not the ones who help decide what the actual strategy is, but they're the ones who are helping you carry it out. So think like a technical implementation of a particular, let's say, a financial transformation process, or they decide they want to go to market into a new market or a new country, and the consulting firm is going to help you execute that. And then lastly, you have functional or industry specialization. So they'll focus on a specific and often niche set of functions. So it's almost, let's say you're specifically an education consultancy or specifically a transportation consultancy, and they will kind of help you with that industry expertise that they have to execute and get your business from point A to point B. So we work with all these types of consultants, and essentially all of them in a different way have a need for expert insights, which is essentially where we come in. So what does an actual consulting professional do on a daily basis in the day-to-day? What does that actually look like on the ground? So put simply, they conduct research and they put together pitches to clients as to how to execute a strategic project or pursue an investment. Now, many of you will either have peers or soon have peers who are in consulting. So, what does that actually look like for them? Consultants have a very different day-to-day depending on what they're working on, but I would say it consists of some core tasks. So for example, data collection and analysis. There's a huge part of the consultant's workflow that's kind of intaking all this information. What is there about this industry that there is to learn? Creating analyses, and then that helps them drive their recommendations. Problem solving, things come up all the time. And so, fundamentally working through the business problems that their clients have and thinking about how they would, strategize through that. But then, also problem solving in terms of, let's say on day one, they had a particular hypothesis, but then that hypothesis changes when they learn more about the industry. Client meetings, definitely, a lot of times those client meetings are driven by the more senior consulting professionals. So as an example, that's a differentiator where AlphaSights came in for me in my career search is, we're the ones interfacing with these clients ourselves. And then those, clients who are often more like junior professionals or even the senior ones themselves, they then carry that to their clients and ultimately present these pitches. A lot of presentations, definitely working on slide decks and trying to make them better, more persuasive, and then managing long-term relationships. That's definitely a big part of it. So what does a consulting professional need to make these decisions? So again, a lot of you will know people who are in consulting and they're not too different from you and me. They went to university, they graduate, this is their first role. And then they ultimately will move up through the organization. But, somebody who is a couple years into their career is fundamentally advising, really senior executives at their companies what they should be doing or people in investment firms what they should be doing. And so we really need to equip them to be able to make those decisions well. And so how do they get up to speed in that? So they're looking for differentiated insights. They want to be able to differentiate themselves from the other consulting firm out there, who is also making a pitch as to what the best thing to do is. They need to differentiate themselves. So they want to be able to say, we really know this space better than anyone, and we have a really good informed decision making as to why, something is the right approach. End user trends. So especially, let's say there's a private equity firm that's thinking about buying a software company. You want to know if buying that software company is a good idea. Speak to the customers. Do the customers actually like the company? Do they not like the company? Do they never want to work with them? In which case, that's probably not a good investment. Or on the flip side, everybody's raving about this, maybe up and comer, and that might be something interested to pursue. Product development trends. So think, for example, let's say there's a corporation that's thinking about launching into a new type of product. They want to be able to understand, like, what are the other trends in that space? What are other companies doing? What's the tech looking like? And, be able to kind of have an informed opinion there. Industry opinions and market sentiment. Is it, an industry that's really fast growing? Is it really expensive to enter? Is it difficult to exit, or whatever it might be? So, speaking to key opinion leaders, especially I would say in healthcare industries, can be really, really impactful. And then lastly, the competitive landscape. This is a huge request that we always get when working with consultings, is just, who's out there? Who are the main players? How do they differentiate from each other? And, fundamentally, if we wanted to advise our client in this area, what would be the best way to do that? So in terms of what resources are available, there's a lot in there that we went through that consultants kind of need access to be able to do their job. So what resources are available to help them do that? So on the one hand, there's public data. Obviously, we all have access to Google, to X, to Reddit, or all of those things, like things that are available on the internet that you can research. You also have, more in-depth, like, research and analysis. So think, more specialized research providers like a Bloomberg, for example, that would give you access to something that, not everybody in the world has access to, but fundamentally is still kind of printed and available on the internet. You have company filings, so thousands and tens of thousands of public filings. Public companies, file each quarter, which is a good way to kind of get to know, especially, public industries or things like that. You also, have a lot of times consultants will have relationships with corporations and the leadership in these corporations to leverage kind of quarterly earnings calls of public companies, management meetings, and essentially, again, try to get up to speed in what's going on. You have industry data, so you can purchase specialized data sets as well to be able to drive your decision making. But fundamentally, all of these things are essentially hard coded, right? They exist on the internet. With AI now, you can search through all of that and kind of synthesize what's already written. But what's not captured here is specifically an uncoded type of knowledge, or a non-codified type of knowledge, which is what lives in people's heads. So for example, I worked on a project once which was thinking about how are senior executives going to respond to COVID when that happened. You can imagine we were pretty busy at the time because everybody had a question mark on what that was going to mean. And obviously I could Google, or I could look up industry filings and things like that to kind of understand what is the impact COVID is having on certain businesses from a numerical standpoint. You could have stats and figures and all of that, but it's a totally different insight to speak to a C-level executive, let's say a CFO who's running a company and trying to decide whether to take their company remote. And what is that experience like? And how are they managing return to work? And what does that feel like? What are their challenges? And so that's fundamentally where industry experts come in. And that's where AlphaSights and our competitors like GLG, Third Bridge also come in, is in the world of AI, where all of codified knowledge, especially now, is gobbled up instantly. That value of experience and ability to kind of communicate with someone who has lived, breathed it, and is doing it currently is just increasingly of value. So we think of knowledge in the concepts of the knowledge economy in two primary dimensions. There's the knowledge that is codified, written down, and the knowledge that is emerging. It's not yet written down, it's held in human brains, and fundamentally that's what gives it its edge. So as I mentioned, the former is facts and figures, programs, articles, academic papers, and the latter fundamentally refers to those ideas, perspectives, experiences that remain in people's brain. And so if you think about it from a competitive edge standpoint, right, like the exclusivity of codified knowledge is generally low. There could be some paywalls, obviously, and some forums that you have to subscribe to and things like that. But fundamentally, if I can Google it, so can the person next to me. And that doesn't give me a competitive edge if I'm trying to compete for business, or I'm trying to really show that I have a differentiated point of view. On the flip side, knowledge that lives within people's brains is incredibly exclusive because it's about who do you speak to? What is that person's experience? How is it different if I'm speaking to a bunch of, chief CHROs? The CHRO from company A will give me a totally different perspective to CHRO from company B. So to take that on, you have to engage with that kind of tacit knowledge. You have to ask the right questions. You don't ask the right questions, you won't get the right answers. You have to elicit understanding. You need to take on multiple perspectives to arrive at your own conclusions. And fundamentally, there's interpretation and objectivity and subjectivity involved. And so that's fundamentally kind of where AlphaSights comes in, is we're helping consultants who are driving this kind of decision making every single day to access this kind of knowledge that typically wouldn't be made available to them by putting them in touch with the people who have the answers. So how does engaging with industry experts deliver success to consulting professionals? Let's take an example. Let's say you have to advise an auto client on their EV charging strategy. So maybe to put this first question to the group, we'll see if this works. Where would you first turn if you had that project and you were somebody who was kind of responsible connecting your client to one of these people? Be a few seconds, but hopefully I'll see the chat shortly. Okay, we have the first one in. Look at the infrastructure. Fair enough. Maybe let's get one or two other ones in here. Get about 5 more seconds, 5 to 10 more seconds. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I'll kind of go through this then. So if we first had this project, this happens a lot. Okay, we got one, the environment, understand the client. There we go. All right, nice. Sweet. So what would we kind of look into if we were, advising a client on their EV charging strategy? If I'm a consultant, I'm going to look at the competitive landscape. So that's somebody put in here, the environment. 100%. I want to kind of understand, what are other people doing in the EV charging space? And, what are the other decisions that are being made? What are the technologies that are evolving? Things like that. I want to know about industry opinions and market sentiment. Is this, an up and coming space? Is this an area that a lot of companies are investing in? Is this an area that they're actually, deprioritizing for other priorities? Are there any major industry product launches to keep in mind? Is essentially, is this client that we're going to advise ahead, behind, or is there something that they need to know about? So to this point, I think that came in from the chat, you need to understand the client. Totally. You need to understand where they are, what are their priorities, what's their willingness to adopt something new like this. We also definitely would want to do voice of customer. So for example, let's say there are certain EV charging providers that you're going to look into. What do their customers have to say? Do they like them? What are their key things that affect their purchasing criteria, things like that. And then technical implications of macro news. So think like regulation, or, how does this differ from country to country? That might be something to think about, especially if this is a client, as they often are, with global remit. How is it going to impact their decision if they're doing this in Germany versus if they're doing this in the US? So how would an expert help a consultant in this case? And how can we, as the facilitator of that exchange, fundamentally, help fill that gap? So consulting firms are making decisions about these topics in industries that are constantly changing. EV charging, for example, I've done a few projects of that in my day, and it constantly has a different scope each time. Their decisions cannot simply be based on codified information that's found online by anybody, because again, it's not differentiated. So they need knowledge that is locked in professionals' minds around the world who have intuitions and insights as a result of working within an industry or space or product line over time. And that's kind of where the need for this type of work comes in. So our challenge as the knowledge on-demand provider, essentially, is we have a client. And there's a million people out there in the world, some of them on LinkedIn, some of them on Instagram, some of them in news articles or wherever it might be. And we, as the knowledge on demand provider, kind of need to sift through several potential experts who have different experiences, different knowledge, and find the right one. So firms like AlphaSights bridge this knowledge gap by connecting clients with clients and consultants in this case directly with the experts to allow them to best assist their own clients. So what we do in the day-to-day and what our associates fundamentally are driving, they're the ones doing this, is reaching out to all of these executives after really understanding what the client is looking for, why they're looking for it, what kind of knowledge gap they're trying to fill. We then, reach out to these senior level executives and fundamentally sell them on the concept of, why should they give us an hour of their time, or, why should they do a short-term consulting engagement with one of our clients and help them out in an industry of interest. We package that experience and essentially say, hey, client, we've spoken to these 3 industry experts that we think are going to be able to fill your knowledge gap, and here's why, and then deliver that. So fundamentally facilitating that exchange of knowledge, and then often rinse and repeat several hundred times. So how do consultants kind of access expert insights? So consultants will leverage firms like AlphaSights across a different range of projects. So we'll speak to clients first. This is what we call our briefing stage, to understand their problems and where their knowledge gaps lie. We then will source the exact industry professional with the expert knowledge that the clients are after, and then we connect them at speed and at scale. So that's kind of the process that I just chatted through. And we set up fundamentally short-term consulting engagements. So think like a one-on-one call. That's our primary deliverable. So that's usually where we'll put them in touch with the industry expert for an hour on the phone. And they will, discuss whatever the topics are be. And a lot of times, the client will then come back to us and say, this was super interesting. I actually want to speak to this person again. Now that we're further on in our diligence, I have more questions for them. Or they'll say, okay, I learned so much from expert A. I now have 10 more questions and I want to speak to 10 more experts. So primarily happening over the phone. And then we also do surveys. So that's actually the team that I grew up on, where essentially we're connecting clients to a higher volume of industry experts. So most often that one's used in the voice of customer context. So let's say, for example, in that case where I said, let's say you have a private equity firm that's thinking about investing in a software company. It's one thing to speak to 5, chief information officers who have implemented that software and get their perspective from a company or a customer perspective. It's another to survey 100, chief information officers, and what are the things that they look for? What was the implementation like? Things like that. And so quantitative insights primarily coming through surveys. We also do what we call research. So essentially putting together expert-driven content. Essentially, what is a hot space in the market that our clients might want to know about, or what is an investment area that essentially needs more attention. Or even if a client kind of comes to us and says, I want to know more about this company because I'm thinking about making an investment. Can you put together sort of expert-led content for me? And then we also do meetings. There have been some really great stories about, connecting to really high level seniority, or even people in government in different countries, and kind of flying them out to come into a last minute meeting and making that possible. So that's all driven from our associates. So you really do get exposure to a lot of different industries and a lot of different people, but fundamentally, this is the kind of place where you have to really love communication. You have to really love the idea of, speaking to a client, understanding what they're looking for, and deliver a result and deliver it pretty quickly. Because different to a lot of consulting firms, the projects that we're working on are on a 1 to 2 day turnaround, if not faster. So you're not working on the same project for 6 months at a time, but you're working on about 15 to 20 projects all at the same time, and all about connecting clients to different knowledge gaps that they want to fill. So I'll end here, and then we'll kind of open it up to questions with a case study of an example of a project that we did working with a consulting client. So this is an example of where a consulting firm advised an investment institution on a potential investment into F1. So I know many people will know Formula One. So hopefully this is a fun one to go through. But essentially, in 2017, F1 went public via acquisition with Liberty Media Group. And so it was the first time that the public actually had a chance to invest in F1. And so it was a pretty rare opportunity to be a shareholder of a sports league. And you can imagine there were a lot of, investment groups that were interested in that. So a consulting firm was onboarded by an investment group to essentially assess whether F1 was a good investment. The end client specifically had expertise in financial modeling and business analytics, but had never considered investing in something like Formula One before. So it was going to be an entirely new space for them. It was going to be an entirely different kind of investment. But it was a fairly, interesting opportunity in that it was a sports league, unique business. There are not that many comparable investment opportunities that a firm could use to base that recommendation. And also F1 was just kind of picking up steam. It was just hitting the public markets, which also means there was limited information about that business that had been published by previous investment firms. So that's a really good example as to when you might need to speak to people in the industry, because again, a lot of information wouldn't be codified, wouldn't be in the internet. And so that's when they would come to AlphaSights to say, right, I need to speak to experts in this industry to kind of assess if this is a good idea. So what happened? We came in and we recruited, vetted, and proposed 20 plus industry experts across a range of topics and disciplines. They had three main components that they wanted to investigate. And so we connected them with different experts who could provide insight into each one of those factors. So for example, how did Formula One appeal to corporations as a sponsorship opportunity? How did marketers think about the ROI on ad spend, especially in comparison to other sponsorship opportunities? So we connected them, for example, with the chief marketing officer at Rolex or the head of sports sponsorship at Heineken. So fairly senior people, but who would definitely be able to speak to the concept of partnerships for sporting events. They also wanted to understand, how did broadcasters think about the quality of the sports rights? So that's where we spoke to or connected them to the former chief content officer at ESPN, the head of sports at Amazon, former CEO of Sky Sports, again, coming from kind of that broadcaster side of things, like how would they, engage with a company like F1? And then lastly, they wanted to understand kind of the outlook for F1 as a league. So we connected the client with former executives, both from the league as well as from teams. So former CEO for F1 specifically, which would definitely give you good insight. Former chief strategy officer at Red Bull Racing as well. So again, kind of speaking from all aspects of what we call the value chain to give them a really good idea as to whether, this investment was a good call. And so the result was our client completed 50 and a bit more interviews in 14 days. So that's when I say very tight turnaround, very quick projects, very high volume in cases. And then what's really interesting is Formula One still remains a pretty heavily researched, topic for investment firms across the globe. So often when one client comes knocking, others will as well. And then we had this really great, testimonial from the client saying, thanks so much for all your help on F1. The experts were able to provide such interesting context to a really exciting business. And we really appreciate how quickly you source the perfect experts for our questions. So yeah, I guess to quickly summarize, and then we'll kind of open it up for any questions that you have about AlphaSights or about this consulting process. In short, consulting firms provide specialized support to companies when they lack the internal expertise to implement business solutions. And then while these consulting firms have access to a million data sources and themselves can be industry experts in certain things, the competitive edge lies in untapping specific human knowledge that is not yet codified and is also more recent in a lot of cases, right? Like we always say that the minute something hits the internet or the minute that somebody leaves a company, they're already outdated. And so, this is a way to kind of constantly have access to information that is up to date. So consultants will leverage firms like AlphaSights to access expert insights across a range of projects. And truly, when I say I've worked in every industry that you can think of, I really mean it, and definitely some industries that I hadn't thought of. So think everything from, pharmaceuticals to chicken procurement to oil rigs in the Middle East to vegan ice cream in insert European country here. So really is quite a mix, but there's all kinds of investment going on, which is really interesting to learn about. And then lastly, accessing knowledge on demand allows these consultants to make strong recommendations for their end clients. And what's been really interesting in my 7.5 years is seeing how the reliance on industry experts has just really, really gone up, especially with consulting clients. When it used to be just kind of like one or two consultants was doing this when they're doing their research, it's become a pretty core and functional part of the consulting workflow to work with experts like this. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. All right, they're slowly coming in. All right, so first question coming in, who are our typical clients? So exactly, it's a mix. Maybe that came in before that slide. So yeah, we have kind of 4 divisions of clients. So corporations, consultancy firms, private equity firms, and capital markets. And so definitely is a mix. And essentially when people join us, they get put on one of those client service teams, and we'll work, with the consultants or with the corporations, depending on what you do. You still work across pretty much all industries, depending on any of these teams. It's just a matter of who your primary type of client is. More coming in. How do you build up the network of people to contact, referring to the F1 example? Really good question. So a few different ways. One is we have a database of experts that we've worked with before. So we'll kind of use that as a foundation. These are people who already are familiar with this type of knowledge work. They have experience working with AlphaSights, and they're kind of on file, essentially. So a lot of times a project will come in. Let's say if we had, the chief marketing officer from Rolex, and we'd worked with them on a project before, we'll give them a quick call and say, hey, we have another client who's interested in your insights. They want to understand X, Y, Z. Would you have that experience? The Rolex guy will say, yes, I do. And I'm available to speak at these times. We then propose the chief marketing officer at Rolex to the client, and the client says, let's do it. So that sometimes it is one way to do it. The other way is what we call custom sourcing. So specifically, we'll go on LinkedIn. We will go on, we'll read newspaper articles to kind of see who the key opinion leaders are, different forums. One time I worked on a project in the influencer beauty industry. So we sourced on Instagram. So it can really come from all over. A few more coming in. Do we use an in-house expert database? Yes, again, to kind of find the initial people, but ultimately there is always a human driving that. So, it's not entirely driven by the tech. What is the most difficult case of business that the company has had, and how did you resolve it? There's tricky ones every day, so it's kind of hard to pick one, but I would say an example of a tricky one that I've had experience with is we were working with a very big chemicals company who was looking into a very small chemical detail, for example. So they needed to speak to the person who knew about this one chemical and was based in a particular region. And so then the difficulty there is, this client really needs that differentiated insight, but tracking down this one person who knows this really unique type of chemical can be fairly tricky. And that's where a lot of the persistence comes in of, we're calling them, often cold calling them, we're emailing them, we're LinkedIning them once we find them. And then once we actually do onboard them, kind of trying to convince them why they should do this type of work, especially if they've never heard of us before. And then you can imagine the satisfaction that comes from actually delivering that, because, fundamentally we want to be the type of people who can find who no one else can find. So that's an example of a tricky type of project. Do you need solid domain experience since you work across sectors? Nope, we're generalists. So fundamentally similar to our consulting clients in this case, we don't necessarily have industry expertise either. So that's actually something that our associates do live. As a project comes in, you have about a minute, maybe, or maybe a bit more, but not that much time to kind of get up to speed in the industry. Who are the key players? Who are the people who would know what we need them to know? And then we put them in touch. And so you gain sort of a surface level understanding of all these different industries. And essentially it's about being able to map out who would know what we need to know. So I think in some roles, you'll kind of go in an inch wide, mile deep. We're more mile wide, inch deep in that way. Common issues that arise during the hiring process internationally that require partnership. I'm assuming that has to do more with recruitment than expert recruitment, so we can come back to that. Navigating cultural differences and kind of how does that come up in this process? So yeah, I think that's actually one of the most exciting parts, especially about being based in London, is we primarily here support all of our European clients. So any of our clients who are based in Europe, so think in the Nordics, in France, in Germany, in Italy, all these different places, they'll essentially come to us and we build the relationship by kind of having that shared cultural understanding. But what's interesting is often, let's say, in Germany, for example, maybe this type of consulting, especially in maybe like a deep manufacturing industry, wouldn't be as ubiquitous as it would be in the US, where this kind of thing is happening all the time. And so, a cultural difference there is, how do we kind of reach out to, let's say, a German manufacturing executive who's never heard of this type of research before, in a way that we're not spam, we're not trying to sell them anything. Fundamentally, we think they have value that they could provide to our client, and we need to kind of put them in touch to make that possible. So, how would we then, do that is we have to be very culturally conscious. A lot of times we hire German speakers and people from Germany to kind of help us navigate that. But it's, how are you going to be most persuasive? What is your outreach going to look like? How will you engage them when you're on the phone? There's definitely a big skill that you learn here is negotiation. How do you effectively negotiate with different experts who come from different cultural backgrounds? And so I wouldn't say there's any specific area where it's, especially challenging, but I think it's something to always be conscious of, and is a really valuable career skill that you get, being able to kind of navigate in a cross-cultural context, especially in our international offices. Most interesting project that I have worked on personally, this is tricky, but I'll go back to the fun one, which was that influencer marketing one. There was an investment firm. We were working with a consulting firm that was supporting the investment firm, and they were thinking about investing in a sort of new beauty kind of tech solution that a lot of influencers were a part of. And we needed to find influencers who had a certain number of followers and get them on the phone with our client. And then they were also doing an expert survey. And so I was reaching out to, popular beauty influencers who had X number of followers and who had experience working with this type of beauty platform, and who could speak to what that was like. And so it was definitely a fun part of my job, was just kind of like going on Instagram and reaching out to these beauty influencers who definitely had never heard of this type of work before. And also just getting to know an industry that I fundamentally did not know about and didn't really have any experience with. So that one was pretty fun. I'll come back to that one. That's about recruitment. What is the criteria used to choose the project that you're going to work on? So we work on pretty much anything that our client asks us to. So if they want to find a super niche expert, if they want to find a pretty, common expert, we do all of that. We don't really say no to any projects unless we're unable to support. But for the most part, we take what comes, and very much our client first in that way. Do I personally like the varied projects that I have to take on in shorter periods of time, or prefer building client relationships over a long period of time? I would say it's actually not an or, it's an and. So with the varied projects that come in, the people who are on the other side, be it a consultant, be it a private equity investment professional, a corporation, it's often the same person, just with different projects. And so when it's well done, you build a relationship in the trenches with the clients themselves. And then when they have another question that they want to solve, they'll come right back to you. So maybe a good example to kind of end on this one, then I'll spend the last 5 minutes answering some of these questions about our recruitment process. I was working with a consulting client at a big strategy consulting firm, and they were doing a really big diligence that was really competitive for them. And they essentially asked us to deliver a survey with 150 experts. And it was going to be a pretty tall order. It wasn't exactly an easy industry that they were looking into. But we said, you know what, we're going to make it happen. I spoke to this client every single day for over a month and a half. So it was a bit of a longer project. It was a hard one. But I spoke to him, about a month. I spoke to him every single day. So we definitely got to know each other fairly well. The project was a success. We delivered 150 experts. They managed to actually go forward with that case, which is great. And then what was interesting was a few years later, that client left the consulting firm and went to join a corporation. And he reached back out to me and said, hey, based on our work together a couple of years ago, I really want to work with AlphaSights here in my new company. So that's an example of kind of, by delivering excellent results and building a client relationship. I was only a couple of years into my career at that point. Like, you really, can build lasting relationships that even go beyond projects or, beyond companies even as well. All right, so definitely some questions in here on recruitment process. And so, do we provide visa sponsorship for European citizens? Yes, we do for select languages. So definitely encourage you to reach out to one of our recruiters or when you apply, and you'll see what our available roles are. But we do offer visa sponsorship for select Europeans. Again, because having European languages, that's one of our biggest differentiators as a company, and our ability to kind of build the client relationships, as I mentioned. A bit about our interview process. So yeah, we have a few different rounds. One of them is a case study round. So that was the question: is do we have a case study interview process? So the different rounds will kind of involve, interview with a recruiter, a case study where there's really nothing you can do to prepare for it. It's more just actually simulating what this process of recruiting and vetting experts and selling them to your client would look like in the day-to-day. So it's more of a test of thinking on your feet than anything else. And then a final round behavioral interview with a VP like myself. Common pitfalls, tips for success. Common pitfall, I would say, is applying and not knowing what we do. So I encourage everybody to, hopefully this presentation has been helpful as a foundation, but definitely understand what AlphaSights is and critically why it fits into your career and why it's something that's interesting for you to pursue and to essentially kind of launch your career here, because fundamentally we're a client first organization, but we're also a people first organization. So, as much as we want to empower success with our clients, we want to empower the careers of our people. And so, we want people who have really thought critically about why AlphaSights is the right fit for them in their career and see the value in the skills that they could gain here. So definitely approach the interview process in thinking about that. And I don't know entirely what this question is, but I'll give it a stab, is how to pivot your career. So maybe that's kind of a segue into, what do people who work at AlphaSights often go on to do? There are some sales aspects of the role, or kind of commercial aspects. So some people will go into sales leadership roles or account management roles or client, like investor relations types of roles. So fundamentally kind of working with different people. It's always likely leading to people organizations. But we've also had a lot of people eventually go on to do masters, people who start their own companies, or they go and join startups, fundamentally as kind of a generalist place. You really can kind of go on to do everything. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful, useful. Definitely encourage you to reach out LinkedIn or otherwise and apply if you think this is going to be the right place for you. So I'll pass it back to Bahar.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Alessandra. And you answered so many questions from the audience, and I'm sure this has been a very important and insightful, and the tips and the tricks that you share with them, I'm sure the students will start applying to the AlphaSight right now. And that being said, I warmly thank you so much for everyone joining this webinar. And the upcoming next, it is BAT, Shaping a Better Tomorrow, where you will hear straight from the BAT graduates across the Europe and about their real career journey. So it starts at 4 p.m. CEST, and make sure to join us. So that being said, thank you so much. Have some tea or coffee, and I will see you there.